Hey Rebels, my name is Matthew Barton. Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. With one of the hottest summers on record, we've seen an entire town in BC burn to the ground. Our skies have been filled with smoke, and many crops are withering in the field. On this podcast, climate change is not up for debate. It's real, human activity is accelerating warming trends, and globally, we all need to take action to mitigate the consequences of a warmer, drier planet. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Beattie to talk about barley, specifically this year's crop, and what our prolonged heat wave means for Saskatchewan's craft beer scene. So let's get into it. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matthew. Good to be here.
How's it going?
Good. It's been a while since we've chatted face to face here.
A couple years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to be back on, but maybe under better circumstances would be better.
I know I've been trying to get you back on for a while, but it's just been so busy and hectic, and then this year was no different.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm glad to hear you guys are still making a good go of it and putting lots of good shows out there.
One of the things that I really wanted to bug you about was I've been seeing a lot of stuff coming through that kind of the ag threads on Twitter and on social media, guys talking about harvest and how they're having a hard time this year. What are you guys seeing?
Yes, it's been a bit of a crazy year. Obviously, as you said in your intro there, we've experienced a year here that is probably something we haven't experienced for at least 20 years in probably most people's minds. And, just the extremes of heat and lack of precipitation this year have put all crops, as you mentioned, and barley specifically, into a pretty tough shape. So, I normally get around to a fair number of sites around Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and looking at the crops in a lot of areas this year throughout the growing season. The crops in some areas got off to not a bad start, but they've been slowly heading in a downward direction since then.
To set the stage or manage people's expectations, when it comes to barley and beer, what is going on in the barley that is important to craft beer?
Right. So, I mean, in a normal year, where you've got good crops and that barley is coming off the field, and eventually what it's going to do for a brewer is it's obviously going to be one of their three main ingredients in their product. And so barley is providing basically food for the yeast, so that it can produce the alcohol and flavors that come from that. And it's also going to be contributing, color to the beer, and as well as some mouthfeel to the beer there. So those are kind of the main things that barley you'll hopefully be getting from your malt as a brewer.
I don't want to put people to sleep, but can we quickly talk about protein and enzymatic activity?
Absolutely, yeah. So in Western Canada, we really have two main types of malting barley that we think of, and they are defined by their enzymatic power. So the enzymes in barley are there to break down the components of the barley grain, so protein and starch, during that germination step within the malting house. And so we have varieties that have a little bit lower enzymatic power, so they have less enzymes there to break down starch, which works perfectly fine for an all malt brewer. But then we have a second group of barley varieties that have a lot of enzymatic power, so they can break down a lot of starch, and those tend to work really well for brewers that have adjuncts. So, typically we'd think of a macrobrewery in that case. So in Saskatchewan, we have both of those types of barley growing typically.
When we think of names, we know for hops, there's like Citra, Mosaic, there's so many different kinds of hop names, but barley doesn't quite have those in the popular culture yet. But if I say something like Metcalf and Bow and Maris Otter, what is Saskatchewan primarily looking at?
Right. So until very recently, we would really be talking about Copeland and Metcalf as our two primary varieties out there. So Metcalf hitting that high enzyme category and Copeland hitting the low. But in recent years, we've been seeing more varieties taking over for Metcalf. So Metcalf is definitely on its way out now. So you'd be hearing names like Bow, Fraser, Connect, and Synergy as well. And so most of those varieties would be in that higher enzyme, or something like a Connect or Synergy. We maybe would fall somewhere in between. So it can be used a little bit in the high and a little bit in the low areas. So those would be the new ones kind of coming on track right now.
To put that into terms that a non-expert could understand, what does that mean at the end of the day? More barley in a glass, less barley in a glass, a cheaper beer, a better beer?
hopefully a better beer. I think what we're really aiming for as breeders who put these varieties out there is that a grower is going to be able to have a little bit higher margin profitability wise, because they're getting more grain per unit acre. So even in a year that may be less than ideal, they can still make a reasonable crop. And from a maltster's point of view, we're making their life easier, hopefully by keeping that protein down a little bit, keeping the grain uniform with high germination rate, so that for them it's pretty easy to modify and hit the specs they're aiming for the brewers. And then from the brewer's point of view, we would be looking at things like lower beta glucan content, which is going to help with making the filtration process a little bit easier for them, and very good extract. So, they can get some higher gravity worts out there, which, may be suitable for some of the beers that they're producing.
Now that we've kind of set the stage, when we look at what's happening with the heat, what does that extreme heat and lack of water do to the barley crop?
Yeah, so it's going to have a number of effects. So, visually, when you're looking at a field of barley, you're going to see quite stunted plants. They're going to be maturing a lot earlier. And so both of those things, especially the early mature, is going to, impact on the yield side of things. And when the plant gets into the stage where it starts trying to produce grain, essentially it's not going to be able to produce as much. And so those fields that you would typically see where the top of the barley plant, which we call the head, where all the grain is, that will be fully emerged from the plant and sitting up there nice and visible. But in a year like this, with the plants not growing as much, those heads get a little bit stuck inside the part of the plant we call the boot. So that can have some issues in terms of grain filling. So essentially, grain filling is not going to happen as much this year. And so what we mean by that is typically the plant will, when it starts to produce the grain, it's producing all of these components such as protein, but as it continues to fill that grain, it's actually filling it with starch, and that's really where you're going to be getting your extract from. So in a year like this, the barley grain that we're going to see, it's going to be very high protein barley. That's going to be the biggest impact that we'll see. And so high protein barley has a lot of potentially negative impacts, both on the maltster and the brewer. So because there's less starch in this grain, that means there's less extract. And so basically you're going to be having lower gravity worts produced from that grain. And as a maltster, that the water uptake into that grain is going to be quite slow, and it's going to actually be quite difficult to modify that grain. And by modify, we basically mean, converting protein and starch into amino acids and simple sugars that the yeast can use. And as they malt that grain, the malt is going to be quite a bit darker than it normally would. So if you're trying to make a beer with less color in it, you may find that your malt is not going to give you those lighter colors that you might typically expect to get. And that's basically because you've got, more hull, more husk per unit volume than you might typically have there. And then, as not surprisingly then, with so much more protein in the malt, you might expect that your beer might have a little more haze in it. So it would be maybe a little bit more akin to using a wheat malt, which would typically have a lot of protein in it, and you would be expecting to get that from the wheat malt. So you might see your barley malt acting a little bit more that way. So it has a lot of knock-on effects, which can be bad for both the maltster and the brewer in this case.
I know we say in craft beer, beer in general, consistency is key, especially when your customers are paying a premium price and they expect the beer to taste a certain way. We joke it's like adjusting the engine of a semi-trailer rolling down the highway at 100 clicks an hour. You're rolling. You don't get time to stop and fine-tune everything. You're kind of figuring it out on the fly. And when you say that's happening to the maltsters, that's happening to the farmers. Like all these pillars to get that beer in your glass are all trying to make adjustments, and they're all trying to wiggle and get right down. It gives me an appreciation for how complex the work it really is.
It is. It's hard, and a year like that. Your point about consistency is bang on, because that's one of the main targets as a breeder, that when you're putting a variety out there, you want that grain to be as uniform as possible. And generally, to kind of take a step back in time, Canada used to grow a lot of 6-row barley. And one of the main reasons it moved into the 2-row, so that 2-row barley basically is the predominant type of barley now. One of the main reasons was for that uniformity of the grain. And in a heat stress year like this, you do see differences between those two types. So a 6-row barley will produce all these seeds in the head, and it'll try to fill them all. And as a result of that, a lot of them will end up thin and quite non-uniform, whereas 2-row barley tends to it'll deal with the heat stress by actually aborting grains. And so it'll pare its head down to a small number of grains, but it'll fill them to a better degree than the 6-row. So, we've kind of built in a little bit of protection with the type of barley we grow in Canada, but still, in an extreme year like this, that's only going to go so far for you.
I like that you said that and broke down the difference between 2 and 6, because it leads into my next question, which was, last time I spoke to you, you guys were developing strains of barley that were resistant to falling over, that were hardier, could withstand a little bit more abuse than previous generations. Can we science our way past our current kind of challenges with climate change?
I think to a degree it's possible. I think, when you look at say water stress or heat stress, I think yes, we do evaluate these lines, or just to take a step back to our other conversation, breeding to produce a given variety, it can be an 8 to 10 year process. So over that time, you are testing these lines under a range of conditions, including heat or moisture stress. And so you're picking those lines that can withstand those conditions a little bit more. And there are certainly researchers out there that dig into those characteristics in a little more detail by looking at certain enzymes or perhaps root systems, that kind of work. So yes, you can, but only to a point. I mean, a year like this where, most parts of the prairies have probably received anywhere from 40 to 60 or 70% of their normal precipitation. So we're way down on that. And then when you compound that with quite a large number of days over 30 degrees, there's only so far that genetics or any other technology can get you to a better place. I mean, sure, I think if you grew maybe a variety much older than the ones we have, perhaps they would fare worse. But still, I don't think that's much solace to a farmer, maltster, brewer when they see what they've got coming at them this summer.
Thinking about what you just said, I wanted to kind of highlight how we're all connected. It's this ecosystem. I hear, for better or worse, I hear some grievances of a urban-rural split or a divide in how we view the world or the economics or culture and politics. But I think I want to draw back and say, look, we're all connected and we're this vast ecosystem. We got to work together. We need our crop scientists like you helping our farmers. We need our farmers working with you guys and our maltsters to ensure that we have healthy, robust crops. We need people working on this and tackling it from all different angles, so we can keep having great beer and keep having a livable, sustainable society.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the science community, I'd say maybe the barley community has always been good about that kind of thinking about, just knowing what the needs or wants of each step in the process, whether you're a farmer or a brewer, and understanding what you do, how it impacts the other people in the value chain there, and trying to work together. And I agree. Like, if you can extend that beyond just the ag industry, I think, it's starting to get out there, especially years like this kind of drive it home a little bit harder in terms of, the future may be here. And so what are we going to do about it? And, if we run into these kinds of years more frequently than we have, I mean, that will really be more in people's face, specifically with the cost of food that they'll be buying, because there'll probably be another part of the world that maybe that year has a better crop, but if those places are becoming a smaller percentage every year, then it's just an add-on effect of increasing your costs. And I think that may be something that would really start to change people's views on things, because I think we're still somewhat buffered from all of this because of the place that Canada is, and the way we've done a good job developing the country from sort of a stability point of view. But other places have been feeling this already, and I can't imagine that we won't be seeing more years like this in the future.
Well, I find it interesting that you mentioned cost of inputs. At the tap room, we tried to keep the price of pints competitive, and we hadn't really adjusted the price of pints for 2 years. And recently, now we're talking about it because we are renegotiating, or we renegotiated our barley contracts, and they're telling us we're going to be paying 21 to 25% more for malted barley next year, just based on what's happened so far. And to think that the average rate of inflation is nowhere close to 21 to 25% I think, wow, that really impacts us. That impacts the consumer. But then I think, what's going on for farmers and what are they thinking?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we do have kind of a double whammy happening this year where, you've kind of seen the impacts of COVID on prices of all items, whether you're a consumer or a grower. And then you add on, the situation this year with the actual farm production. And yeah, I mean, that's next year's going to be a bit of a gong show, for prices, as you already mentioned. And, we'll have to see. I mean, if we get 2 years in a row of this, then we get into a really interesting situation where, seed supply starts becoming an issue because, we'll still have some carryover stocks from last year that can be used in 2022 for the farmers. But 2 years in a row, and that really depletes that sort of that's seed stock there. And there may be even some growers who hung on to seed last year who will maybe let it go this year because someone might come along with a really high price for either feed or for malt that they'll say, oh well, I might as well get rid of it now. And that might put next year into a little more difficulties than we might be thinking otherwise. Sure, right? It's a real shame too, because I mean this year, barley acres were up huge amount, almost 1 million acres over last year, and so we hadn't seen the potential production like this for 2 decades at least. So there was the potential for a lot of nice barley for both the domestic and then selling externally too. From a farmer's point of view, I think they had sort of they had a chance to do quite well this year. So that was a bit of a disappointment just from that point alone.
One of the things I've been talking about with Mark and some of the other guys, the brewers at the brewery level, craft beer level, is we can make barley sexy and we can really push it into the popular imagination of people, kind of the way they did with wheat. I want things like Copeland and Bow and those things to be on the tip of people's tongues. When you say, what's in your glass? Oh, it's Bow Barley, and it was developed at the U of S, and it was grown in Saskatchewan. I want them to really understand this was a made in Saskatchewan, our ingenuity, our scientists, our farmers, and it's really special. And what do you think about that? Like, is that a too far-fetched idea, or is that something we could achieve?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's reasonable. I think people, the consumers in general, are getting more interested, obviously, for a while now in what they're consuming. And it would be quite interesting. I mean, we kind of throw around, everyone knows what a Macintosh apple is and those sorts of things. So the names are out there, right? And people may not conceptually know why it's a Macintosh apple or how that name got attached to it. But yeah, I mean, I think the first step from the barley point of view would be, getting brewers to know what they've got, because you could probably ask that name of a fair number of brewers, and they'll instead of giving you a variety name, they'll tell you it's a pale malt, right? And so it's not quite the same thing, and so educating them first would be step one. And I think once they were on board with that, I think it would naturally flow to their customers. I think some of them, will, use the name in some manner, either on the bottle or maybe occasionally in a name of the beer. And I think, especially like you said, having a local, whether it's a Saskatchewan or Western Canada, however you want to think of as local, knowing that these products are coming right from here, I think how can that not build some loyalty to that whole idea? And we talk about food security and all these things. I mean, these are important concepts for people, and I just don't know if there's a good awareness of in general, what kind of things are being done in ag in Canada that would support those ideas.
I would like to be so ostentatious to say, within the next 2 to 5 years, you're going to see labels on cans and bottles talking explicitly about where the barley was grown. I think there's a deep and abiding interest amongst more and more consumers. Every day we're getting more and more specific answers about our inputs and what's going into it. We see not pressure, but excitement or interest. People want to know.
Yeah, I think it would be great to see. I mean, you kind of see that scattered around here and there in the food industry. The sort of PC blue menu where they've got a farmer's face on a package of this or that, or I think those things they make a lot of sense, and they make that connection for people. And I think you're right. I think within 5 years, that's a pretty reasonable time frame, and I think that 2 years might be probably more accurate.
So what do you got coming up in the next few weeks? I know farmers are already pulling crops off the fields. I know the heat wave is still kicking. We still got lots of smoke in the sky. What's coming up for you guys?
Yeah, we just started harvest today ourselves, so we'll be doing this over the next month or 6 weeks, and I'll be out there kind of taking notes on things. So basically that's going to be our month here, and it's always a hectic month, but it always feels good when you're done with it too. And I think this year, a lot of us are just, like you say, it's been kind of a weird summer, so we're kind of looking forward to getting out of the field this year and just calling it a day on this growing season, and look forward to a better one next year.
I know the Sask Craft Beer Festival is being held in Saskatoon this year, or is planned to be, pending COVID nonsense.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if I can make it up there, I can see you out in the crowd and toast you a little bit and just say thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll have to keep an eye out for each other there, and that would be great.
Just look for my big shiny bald head.
Me too.
Aaron, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Always a pleasure.
Rebels, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, be sure to join us on our brand new Facebook group page, the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm going to include links in the show notes so you can find more about Dr. Aaron's work online. I'm also proud to let you know that we're members of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. It's a one-stop shop of tons of locally produced shows from across our province. You can find them at saskpodcastnetwork.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Untappd so you don't miss out on the latest in Sask Craft Beer news. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.